If you have bad quality interview audio, no one's going to watch your documentary. Today, we're going to talk about a simple step-by-step approach to clean up your interview audio so that it goes from sounding like this.
He's a very conceptual person. What he's good at is problem solving.
To sounding like this.
He's a very conceptual person. What he's good at is problem solving.
Stick around in particular for step 3 because it's one of the biggest mistakes I see most amateur documentary editors make, and the fix for it is so simple and it's going to elevate the perceived quality of your film tenfold. Over the past 5 years of editing documentaries that have gotten into film festivals all around the world, I can say firsthand that having good interview audio isn't going to be the difference between whether your film gets in a festival or not. But I can say with certainty that having bad interview audio is pretty much a surefire way to get your film cut from these festivals. Okay, so let's dive into my 6-step process for cleaning up your interview dialogue. Now, I've separated the first 3 steps and the last 3 steps into 2 different categories. The first category that we're going to cover is dialogue editing. So this is anything that you're actually doing on the edit timeline to manipulate the audio files. And then the second half, the last 3 steps, is audio processing. So this is any effects or treatments you can do to the audio clips to make them sound even better. You want to do your dialogue editing first to make sure that everything's cleaned up as much as possible so that when you start applying effects, you're working with the best possible version of your audio. Step 1, clean up the dialogue. It's pretty rare when you're editing documentaries that you get a character on camera who is well-spoken and succinct enough to give you sentences that have fully formed ideas and a natural start and finish.
He's an ideas person, and he can see.
We ultimately want to hide all of the edits we've made to the interview so that it sounds like our characters have delivered their thoughts and ideas in coherent sentences. The biggest thing to focus here, other than removing mistakes and ums, is to listen back to the interview, close your eyes, and make sure that the interview actually sounds natural. Like if you were listening to someone and having a conversation with them, it sounds like someone's delivering a real sentence. For example, here's a bad version of that.
He's a very conceptual person. What he's good at is problem solving.
And here's a good version.
He's a very conceptual person. What he's good at is problem solving.
So once we've cleaned up our dialogue in the edit timeline, we're ready to move on to step 2, removing pops and clicks with fades. One of the bigger issues I hear in a lot of amateur documentaries is the clicking and popping that happens at the start or end of clips. So what we need to do to fix this is we want to introduce a tiny 1 to 3 second fade on the start and end of every clip. You can actually do this with batch fades in Fairlight, which is super handy. You just want to make sure that you actually go through and listen to all of them to make sure there's no weirdness or any weird crossfades between your various clips. Another area where this is really useful is when you're working with a character who maybe they were nervous, some of their words kind of blend into one another.
He's a very conceptual person, and
if you add these fades, you can get very, very precise with these 1 to 3 frame fades and cut off the end of the one word before it gets into the next word.
He's a very conceptual person.
The cleaner you can be in this part of the process, the smoother it will be in the next steps. Step 3, adding room tone. When you're watching a lower quality, lower budget documentary and you hear an interview underneath B-roll clips, the interview is a little bit noisy, so you can immediately tell when someone's about to talk. And then as soon as they're done talking, the noise goes away and it's just pure silence. And it's super distracting.
He's a very conceptual person. What he's good at is problem solving.
And this is what we're trying to fix with room tone. Room tone is the noise that naturally occurs in any room. Every single room has a sound to it. When you roll your camera, if you're not saying anything and you're just recording sound, you're recording room tone. Now, the reason why that one documentary sounds weird is because there's room tone underneath the dialogue when the person's speaking, but as soon as they stop speaking, there's no room tone. So it sounds like we're in a very real space. We can hear the room around them, and then all of a sudden, we're pulled out of this space and we're just in a space of silence. It's very jarring and it immediately takes you out of the moment. So here's the incredibly simple fix. Take room tone from the same interview clip, then we copy this room tone, throw it in between our two clips of dialogue, and add a little crossfade.
He's a very conceptual person. What he's good at is problem solving. He's a very conceptual person. What he's good at is problem solving.
Now, when your character's talking, we never really leave the room once they're done their sentence. We're still hanging out in the room with them because of this room tone. So the next time that they begin to talk, it's not jarring because it sounds like we're still just in the room with them. Okay, so now that we're at step 4, we're moving away from the dialogue editing phase and into the dialogue processing phase. The dialogue processing phase, steps 4 to 6, is more so to sweeten your dialogue, to add that extra 10% that makes it that much better. But if you don't want to do this stage, you should hopefully be at a point where it's clean enough that if you're in the rough cut stage or you just want to show it to someone, your audio won't be distracting anymore. With all that being said, let's move on to step 4, reduce noise. Now notice how I said reduce noise and not remove noise. I think a common pitfall that a lot of newer editors fall into when they're processing their dialogue is to try and remove all noise from their audio. When we remove all of the noise from dialogue, we run into the same issue that we had when there was no room tone. It tends to sound very unnatural and oftentimes can sound very robotic.
So we started making outdoor clothing and equipment in the 1920s.
Even if we have loud hisses, background hums, all of that stuff, we don't want to remove it entirely. We just want to reduce it to a level that's passable. DaVinci Resolve's noise reduction is incredibly powerful for this purpose. But the key, as I mentioned, is to use it conservatively. First, I start with really subtle settings and then test those settings in the context of my edit. So what I mean by that is play this interview dialogue with noise reduction within your edit that has music or sound effects or other things going on.
He's a very conceptual person. What he's good at is problem solving. He's a very conceptual person. What he's good at is problem solving.
We actually don't need to reduce the noise as much as we think. We just need to reduce it enough so that it's not distracting within the edit. But things like music and sound effects can often hide or disguise little low-level hums or hisses. If your clip is really noisy, slowly ramp up the settings until you get to a point where you feel like it's no longer distracting. But try not to go too far. Step 5, fix the dynamics. The interview subjects in documentaries are real people. Real people get excited. Real people get sad. Real people's brains wander towards the end of sentences and they get quiet. There's all of this different peaks and valleys to someone's volume as they naturally speak and talk about emotional subjects. This is where dynamics come into play. Now, if you know what you're doing, compressors can be a great tool and they can be very quick. The problem is you have to know how to tune them properly, and oftentimes compression needs to be applied differently depending on the different voice, the different interviews from all your different characters. And if you're not an audio engineer, that can get out of hand real quick. So the way I personally like to handle dynamics is to just get down and dirty and get in there and do volume automation. In DaVinci Resolve, it's also super handy that you have the visualization of the waveform, so you can kind of already see off the bat what parts are quiet. Just get in there with your pen tool and level those out. This seems more tedious than just slapping on a compressor, but honestly, this requires far less understanding and has way less potential to go wrong and give you weird artifacts that compressors can sometimes do if you don't fully know how to use them. Step 6, EQ. So what we're doing in this stage is we're trying to bring out the natural character that exists already in the person's voice so that it stands out against other elements like music or sound effects. Equalization is a really deep rabbit hole of a discussion, and I by no means am the professional sound engineer who can walk you through it in a precise manner, but there are many rules of thumb that I use just for adding that little bit of clarity to voices that I work with in interviews. Cutting off anything that's below 80 to 90 hertz, it's going to remove any rumbles, any really deep bass from various machinery or hums in the room, background noise. Odds are whatever you're removing isn't human, so you're pretty safe there. Removing any harsh or muddy sounding frequencies, often those frequencies can just compete with other elements like music. And harsh frequencies, we obviously want to remove them because they're just hard on our ear and they just become tiring. There's a technique that I use to identify these frequencies and then remove them that you can apply in a general sense with any equalizer. First, what you want to do is you want to take one of the bell-shaped equalizers, then you're going to adjust it so it's pretty narrow by manipulating your Q amount. Boost that frequency and sweep through your frequency spectrum. As you sweep through while you're listening to your character talk, you'll find points in their voice that start to sound really whistly. Those are the frequencies that your brain is perceiving as harsh or muddy. So once you come across one of those frequencies, all you need to do is drop the gain of that frequency by 3, maybe 6 dB. You can widen the Q a little bit as well. And now you've effectively diminished that frequency and you've removed some of that muddiness or harshness.
And I guess this set of projects, the bindings and the Turks and building his own skis, they're all driven by a passion for getting into the mountains.
Lastly, adding a really subtle boost around the 5 kilohertz region will add a little bit of clarity to your dialogue. The 5 kilohertz is just a rule of thumb. This is obviously going to change if you have like a deep, boomy male voice versus like a more high-pitched female voice. You might have to play with what sounds good, but generally something in that range will just add a little bit more presence, will make their voice sound more obvious within the context of your film. All right, we walked through a lot of different steps there, and I know there was a lot going on, but just as a reminder, let's go back to where we started and listen to every one of these steps to see where we've ended up.
He's a very conceptual person, and he can see. He's a very conceptual person. What he's good at is problem solving. He's a very conceptual person. What he's good at is problem solving.
Clean interview audio isn't about perfectionism. It isn't about trying to create a pristine audio recording through various tools and means. The goal of this audio editing and processing is to clean up your interview enough so that it's passable and not distracting to your audience. Because when your audience isn't fighting to understand the words that are coming out of your character's mouth, they can actually step back, relax, and focus on the person who's telling them this beautiful story. So now that you know how to clean up your interview dialogue, you might be asking, how do you go from hours upon hours of interview footage to finding your story? What if I told you that I came up with a way to use AI as an assistant editor that can help you narrow down your story arc in a matter of minutes? To learn more, check out this video on how to use AI to edit documentaries here. And I'll see you guys in the next one. Later.